During the pandemic, sharing data became more important than ever. Under the current model, a project goes through quite a lengthy process. What was the underlying factors? Was it COVID directly, for example?
Welcome back to the PSU podcast, giving you views, insight and conversation with leaders from across the public sector. I'm your host, Dan Ben. Today I'm joined by James Hartley-Binns from the Office of National Statistics. James is the Head of Programme Engagement for the Integrated Data Service. The IDS is a groundbreaking programme led by the Office of National Statistics in collaboration with government departments and devolved administrations. Once the IDS is fully implemented, it's anticipated that every citizen of the UK is to benefit. James began his career in local government as the Head of Health and Leisure Services in 2015, before moving to the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency as a policy professional. He was then seconded into the Department for Transport, where he joined the Critical Task Force aimed at securing British supply chains for medicine, computer processors, food and defence products at the end of the UK-EU's transitionary period. He's also the chairman of an arts charity based in the New Forest, which focuses on wellbeing and outreach amongst isolated members of the community. So James, how are you? Are you all right?
I'm very well, thank you. You make my career sound very interesting, which it has been, of course. But yes, I'm very well, thank you.
No worries, it does sound very interesting, and I can't wait to hear more about the next little bit of it. So, about the IDS, obviously data and digital transformation as well is a massive part of government aims at the minute. I do a lot with digital transformation, especially at the minute, and obviously government will have a lot of data everywhere. But what barriers have prevented effective data sharing across government in the past?
It's a good question. Kind of a subsidiary to that, I suppose, is, what are we as an organisation in terms of the ONS and IDS as a programme doing to help solve those problems? Where, during the pandemic, sharing data became more important than ever, as you can well imagine. But one thing it shone a light on was the complexities of obviously doing so. So access restrictions and boundaries between organisations have always posed challenges for onwards sharing of data and for analysis of data. And analysts working within government data have often had to navigate complex legal frameworks and isolated working, which is always a problem and creates delay, or in some cases can even prohibit important innovative research. And the challenge has evolved how to share that timely, relevant data securely across government, academia, but also thinking the wider research community to support effective government decision making. So other challenges include the limitations of technical capacity, which is something perhaps, Daniel, you've come across before, and digital infrastructure, which is a problem, processing power too of your computers. Mistrust amongst government departments or organisations more generally is, always got to be overcome, and obviously those security concerns. And we in the ONS and IDS specifically too have made big steps forward, but there are still fundamental challenges to overcome. The federated system government model that is sort of implemented at the moment within government generates a very clear kind of protective bubble around data assets held within government departments. We should be more collaborative, but everyone likes to have their own kind of kingdoms, don't they? And we've got to break down those silos. And although there is always a desire and intent to share data, those things that I mentioned previously, those concerns about the security, risk management, they often prevent that wider use. And a cultural shift is underway. I think in the wake of things like COVID, where there is an intention to share data more broadly, and we're seeing across government sort of a more kind of singing in concert, for want of a better phrase, with other government departments, where there's greater recognition now of the benefits of sharing data for research, while trusting in the stringent security and ethics procedures that are in place within ONS. And as I say, sorry to keep bringing it back to it, but I do think that COVID was kind of, and we'll get onto this a little bit more later as an example, but COVID was kind of instrumental in showing how you could unlock the benefit of data through obviously producing policies. When COVID hit, it wasn't just a health matter; it was a treasury matter, it was a tax matter, it was an educational matter, because kids' education was impacted on this, and so you needed to bring this data together to unlock the policy decision which could be made. And that's obviously shown the benefit and the worth of that data collaboration space. And any solution to data sharing barriers must provide that faster insight, produce benefits in time and cost, promote collaboration, and serve the public good. It's all, what we're all about in the ONS, but the civil service more broadly, it's about the public and what we're doing for the public. And actually on that, I would just like to mention, sometimes we look at what's the disbenefit from sharing data, what's the concerns, but actually I think sometimes we should look at it the other way around and saying, what are we not doing for the public by not sharing and linking this data? And actually I think there's a bigger concern there than sometimes just sitting on this stuff in silo. And our collaborative approach, built through IDS with this kind of secure cloud-based platform, which is what we're launching next spring, that builds on the successes of previous programs such as the Secure Research Service, which many of your listeners will probably be aware of. And just on that, I think it's worth highlighting at this point early on that there are no plans to close down the SRS at the moment. There will be a transitionary period from the SRS to IDS, where IDS capabilities ramp up, new work is begun on new research is conducted on the IDS, and there will be a natural drop off or decline of research that's produced on the SRS in alignment with those transitioned over. And so at some point the SRS will be closed down, but no immediate plans to do that. But talking more specifically about kind of the IDS, it is the next step in data sharing, in the data sharing journey, where, in a far more advanced form, government will have the ability to work with the data at source in a safe and secure environment, rather than moving data around, which currently creates friction and significant cost. And as you can imagine too, if you've literally got your memory key and you're putting that slice of the data and you're taking a different cut of the data each time, you're never really sure which is the most up-to-date version. You've got all these different cuts running around the place. So having it in one place, obviously in a secure environment, reduce some of that risk. But IDS will also make more data available more quickly, and they will be easier to link. So collaborative analysis will be possible across government departments, which at the moment is very difficult to do, but also with academic institutions through that secure, high-powered cloud-based service. And that will therefore, we hope, anticipate, expect, become the default. And the service will reduce the cost and time it takes users to identify, acquire, access and process the data required to undertake analysis for improved policy decision making, like I referred to there with the example of COVID-19. And these improved forms of data linking will sit alongside the analytical and visualization tools. So IDS is I kind of explain it as sort of two arms to it, really. There's the analytical platform where you kind of run your analysis and you can play with the data, produce your outputs. But then there's the other arm of it, which is the dissemination side. This might be the sort of public facing element to it, where if your listeners were to look at the climate change portal produced by IDS, ONS online, and then they would see kind of the visualization element, dissemination element that we're producing for the integrated data service. Still very much in early phase at the moment, but that's something that we are producing.
Yeah, 100%. I think you touched on that cultural shift within government, and that's something I've definitely noticed as well. I'm by no means an expert in data, in digital, anything like that. Hence why I'm not working for the government. But kind of that culture, that's something I've really noticed. And in the work I've done recently about it, COVID-19 and the pandemic was a massive, kind of one of the massive signifiers that things were changing, because you couldn't go to the office all the time, and people, it was easy to reach people with digital, and you had all this data, because obviously there's even more data that you have to compile. And then you also mentioned kind of with that shift as well, that government it all needs to be secure, doesn't it? Like, you've got people's addresses, people's personal details, and some government details obviously are so important that they need to be protected. So was it just the security that was the main encouragement that departments needed in terms of seeding their data?
There's quite a bit of work going on this at the moment in terms of encouraging government departments to give over their data. At the moment, a lot of it is to do with the security element. So the integrated data service at the moment, we are in the beta phases. So we are not a BAU platform currently. We are heading towards DEA accreditation in the first quarter of next year. Once we secure Digital Economy Act accreditation, that makes it more easier for us to be able to bring on board some of these critical data, data assets more broadly, but critical data assets too, from across government. And there's a whole piece of work that's going on with the likes of CDDO, which is aiming in some of its missions, I think it's mission 3, looking at making critical data available across government and looking for platforms which enable that. And, hello, IDS, we are here, we are an enabler of that. Some of it is just about trust as well and having those conversations. Some of it is also just about us being able to be clear about what we want the data for, and how it can unlock the greatest benefit across government. So there's a whole piece that's being worked at the moment, a strategic data acquisition piece being worked within data growth operations, DGO within the ONS, aimed at looking at, as we build up the capabilities in terms of the data for IDS, because obviously, as you can imagine at the moment, because we are working in that beta phase, we have kind of an MVP in terms of some of the data that's on there at the moment till we ramp it up. What are some of those key data that we think is of critical importance across government, and what's the demand for it? And some of the work my team have been doing, because we do a lot of the engagements of engaging, saying, having that two-way conversation. What is IDS? What's the benefits? But what, more importantly, can you, as a researcher, a government analyst, get from this? We want to gather that intelligence, and if there is intelligence out there, and we're finding that national pupil data set, which by the way is one of the data sets we're going to onboard, is of key strategic importance, then we'll build that into our pipelines. But specifically, yes, DEA accreditation, crucial to us getting that kind of buy-in from government departments. But more broadly, I would say that cultural shift has meant that there is a real willingness now to collaborate, and that's becoming evident in the conversations we're having. So we need to maintain that goodwill and act upon it appropriately. And once we have that DEA accreditation, I'm sure that will provide the security assurances that are necessary for a lot of those government departments to be willing to onward share. The other thing about that is, in time, IDS could become the TRE for government departments. I appreciate many at the moment will want to keep their own TRE. So we need to look at the different access methods. And there's kind of 3 methods: enable, deposit, and donate. Donate, you just literally donate the data over. Deposit, it's sort of deposited in the cloud, accessible through APIs, and then enable, which is where using APIs we can access the data at source. That's something again which we are working on, those 3 methods in terms of implementation, but that will help us in terms of our ability to access the data and maintaining or ensuring that buy-in too.
Yeah, and I think those ways of bringing data together, that all leads on to kind of what ways is it bringing together data in terms of guiding policy. And, a big thing when I was looking up about this is answering questions before they're asked, before they need answering. So how can it guide policy and help kind of solve the issues that government is facing and that people are facing in 2022, 2023 and beyond?
So we've kind of got, as I look at it, kind of like the historical data-driven model. So again, anybody who's kind of worked within the data or digital domain, but particularly the data domain within government, will recognise the familiar problems with obtaining access to data and the lack of integrated data which could support those better policy decisions, or the ability to run kind of like bite-sized analysis. Effectively, when a new policy question is identified, under the current model, a project goes through quite a lengthy process. So, you have to identify the data to help answer the question. You write up the project, or the researcher writes up the project proposal. We then tend to hit the pain points, which are kind of data acquisition and data engineering and the linkage. That can severely slow down the process. If you're trying to work at pace because a policy question has presented itself and you've got to get an answer, if we're in the data acquisition part of the process, that, as I say, that can take some time. Previously, onboarding data such as LEO, I think it's the longitudinal educational outcomes data, took several years. So you can see how that becomes a problem. But then finally, kind of the data is made available, the analysis is run, outputs disseminated, etc. Project comes to an end. Obtaining that highly relevant data across government should be straightforward. It's not, as we said at the beginning of our conversation, lots of memorandums of understanding, legal agreements, and frameworks that need to be adhered to. And what we need to do is kind of turn that model on its head. So, how do we change the current model so the pain points, as I sort of think of it in my head, we put them at the beginning and we kind of make them an enabler rather than a prohibitor. So what we need to do, going back to kind of some of that conversation we were having about some of the good work that's happening in terms of strategic data prioritization and acquisition within DGO, is we need to identify, acquire, standardize and link data, bring it onto the system, IDS, before the policy question has been identified to kind of speed up the process. So to this end, work is already ongoing to create kind of like a number of what we're calling IDAs, integrated data assets, with more to follow. And they are IDAs such as public health, levelling up, net zero, jobs and skills. And the fundamental point of these is that these will be critical data assets which will be hosted centrally and can be shared widely across government, to help support the answering of policy questions as they arise. And the revised approach of bringing forward those pain points to the forefront then feeds into that the new data-driven model, as I say. So to reiterate, instead of acquiring like a data set from DLUHC or DWP, HMRC or DFE, which would take an awful long time in doing so, silo working, or once a policy question has been identified, what IDS will do is have that data available, linked, standardized, and research ready. Therefore, if a policy question presents itself imminently, let's say in the health and energy space, for example, then the data is ready to go. You don't have to go through kind of a very long, drawn-out onboarding process or acquisition process. The importance of that is that the relevant body, government department or in time academic institution, for example, will be able to make an informed and rapid policy decision. The data can then be put, once we've got it into the desired project space, once the project proposal has been accredited, because you've still got to go through your individual accreditation, your project accreditation was still governed by the remit of UKSA and here, and quite rightly so too. The analysis then is undertaken in that secure environment, the TRE, which is the IDS, and the outputs can be disseminated in a format of the analyst's choosing as well. And as sort of going back to that piece about dissemination and like using the climate change portal as an example, it's not a one size fits all. The dissemination side of it can be kept private for the analyst if necessary, or for a minister, if that were the case. It can be tables, it can be interactive infographics, whatever, and of course, I should just say, IDS is never always going to have every piece of data which an analyst might want. The power of IDS is it's iterative. Over time, we might get to a critical mass or a point, where we do in an ideal world. But there will potentially always be an element of kind of tactical acquisition of certain, data, depending on what the requirements are of a project. But though that data that is still being acquired tactically will help grow the data available on IDS, because we will be acquiring it for multiple purposes, and it creates a more kind of diverse, complex set of data, which is, again, readily available for analysts to use.
Yeah, and you mentioned there the climate change portal and the power of IDS, and that I think that the potential of IDS is what is really important, especially to kind of devolved governments as well, who they're not as, obviously they're not central government, so they're not as centralised. And could you give us any examples of times when unlocking the potential of linked data has properly benefited society? So, kind of a big thing at the moment is the rising food and fuel prices, cost of living, and then obviously you did mention climate change and net zero. Are there any examples when it's already benefited society?
Yes, so there's a couple there. So from an IDS perspective, so like talking as we've kind of gone around it a few times, but as a specific now of the climate change portal. So there's one example of how IDS, will link data to bring it back to the program and allow rapid analysis on a growing range of data assets. So that portal acts as an accessible one-stop shop, basically, for statistics on climate change and related topics, including drivers such as energy use and emissions levels, giving clear, accessible and accurate information to inform policy and support responses across the public, private and obviously the third sectors too, and by the citizens and communities across the United Kingdom. Climate change, as we know, global problem that ultimately requires global data, and like many, if not all, the greatest challenge facing us, it's best tackled collaboratively. And there are a number of initiatives already underway to bring climate change statistics together internationally, through the likes of the United Nations, International Monetary Fund, and the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, to name a few. But we share that ambition, and we'll continue to work alongside those and other organisations, devolved administrations too, as you rightly indicate, Daniel, around the world, but the UK, for the public good. But a further kind of example is an important part of the government's 2021 tackling violence against women and girls strategy is to work across government to improve data and in turn improve understanding of these sorts of crimes. So alongside improvements to our data landscape, we've produced a VAWG dashboard. It's called VAWG, an interactive data dashboard powered by IDS. And the aim of that dashboard is to visually display the main data relating to violence against women and girls in a single place, providing kind of a comprehensive picture of VAWG, which is easy to access. So a prototype of the dashboard was released, I think it was in September of this year, on gov.uk website, so you can go and your listeners can go and have a look at that. Currently it contains ONS data from the Crime Survey for England and Wales and the Opinions and Lifestyle Survey, I believe. And it provides data on about 5 abuse types: so domestic abuse, partner abuse, sexual offences, harassment, and I think the 5th one is child abuse. Terrible, terrible situations. No one can underestimate that. But it's useful to enable government to make that effective policy decisions to help rectify these situations, perhaps in terms of policies such as what can we do in early intervention. So perhaps not the cheeriest example, but it's a really important one for society.
Yeah, 100%. There's already been a few times when I've been covering kind of more local government news, and there are efforts to try and give support to victims of abuse, and I think kind of the data on that is really important. Obviously, much like with the COVID-19 pandemic and stuff like that, the more data, then the better the policies can be.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, that's the other one. So, looking back at the start of the pandemic, when we were able to link NHS data on who was suffering from COVID, which was obviously effective at providing us with the basic detail of who had COVID and how seriously and sadly, whether they passed away, but it failed to capture other detail that would help us understand, why. What was the underlying factors? Was it COVID directly, for example? And when we linked those NHS data with data from 2011 census, which enabled us to gather much richer insight on people's ethnic group, their occupation, living conditions, and the type and size of family they might live with. Critically, this enabled the government to target its policy at those groups where vaccine uptake was low. You remember the vaccine rollout program we all do. But it also enabled government to understand whether people were more likely to suffer from COVID due to occupation, culture, or location, or perhaps where they live. And it's use cases like this that clearly deliver that public benefit, which we've talked about, that are helping to change that culture of government again, bring it right back to where we started, and drive policy decisions at pace. And this, again, crucially, is where IDS, with all three of these examples, but particularly the last, is showing how IDS is an enabler of that kind of reform of mindset in government. But, the experience of those analysts from that time with the work that was ongoing with COVID, both good and bad, has fed directly into the design of the integrated data service. We're not all about just taking what's worked well. We've got to look at what hasn't and build that into what we are doing. And the IDS will enable research experts, to have an ever greater impact through their use of government data and, in time, as I say, wider data from across that research community.
Yeah, you mentioned about the past experiences that fed into the development of the IDS. And you did mention earlier the SRS, the Secure Research Service, and the IDS was built on the foundations of that. How important was the SRS to the development of the IDS? And kind of, is there any more you could tell us about that?
Yes, so you're right. It's absolutely fundamental, the SRS, to what we are doing in terms of building the IDS. So I just caveat that when I started in the IDS, I had not come from an SRS background or worked within SRS, but they are crucial to what we're doing. They form part of our division. The SRS was obviously built for kind of non-government analysts in mind, non-government researchers, the wider academic community. IDS is being built predominantly to utilise government data and government analysis, but the two will be combined, as a one-stop shop for researchers and government analysts alike. Everything in terms of the customer support function, the data which is of most worth and is used the most, the tooling, the technical capabilities and the wants, that kind of insights gathering of the existing user base for the SRS, all of these insights, intelligence gathering which has happened over the past decade have all been factored into the new model of IDS. So absolutely, no one should be under any illusion that the IDS is sort of being switched off because it's, ONS has stopped caring about the SRS, or we're not sort of trying to bake in the best bits. No, we want. That's why we've got sort of like the visualization tool that's being produced, as I say, through that climate change portal. It's about taking the best bits of the SRS, baking it into IDS, and using that insights gathering to help us produce the next model, which will hopefully be, will be better than the last. But absolutely, it's that work that's been done by those working within the SRS and those that use the SRS, it is crucial to the project delivery plan that we are working to. Yeah,
it's important to recognise kind of the past of government data and where you've come from, because that's how you learn going forward.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for the work that the SRS had done over the past decade, we would not be in the position we're in now. We've got a strong base. We know what works well. We also know now what doesn't, and what perhaps our user base, as it is unfolding with technological changes, but also demand-led changes, what we need to do. And because we've had an exemplar model in the SRS, that has enabled us to look forward with confidence and actually have a base from which we know with confidence we can deliver another product in the IDS confidently.
Absolutely. And obviously that was the past of government data. What does the future of government data actually look like?
Integrated, standardized, linked, research ready, so that it is there, as I say, when a policy question presents itself. Now, I don't want to underestimate the work for your viewers, or your listeners, that is going into that strategic acquisition piece. So at the moment, in terms of, the future of data I'd like to bring it back around for the IDS. There are a large number of conversations going on about what data do we want, what data are we bringing on. So to give you an example of some of the things that we are envisaging, we're bringing on job vacancy data, annual business survey, national pupil database, some VAT data, potentially UCAS data, trade in goods, census data. So big one, census 2021, we're hoping to onboard that. Ordnance survey data. So these are some of the things that we are looking at. But there are kind of two arms to how we're bringing that on at the moment. One is that strategic data acquisition pipeline, which is being worked on. The other is kind of a tactical model where we are having conversations with key government departments, and on the back of some of those engagement pieces where we are obviously disseminating the good work about IDS, and a number of your viewers may have, listeners may have even participated in some of our educational presentations. But on the back of those, government analysts are sort of coming forward to us and saying, well, this sounds really good, actually, and we understand you're in a beta phase, but is there potential for some kind of alignment? And we might have a discussion about, well, what kind of project is it you're looking to run? Does it align with our technical capabilities? Is it something we could look at, producing outputs for? And then, if necessary, tactically acquiring the data that's necessary in order to deliver on the requirements of the project. So that's something that for IDS we are working on at the moment. So, for IDS, but for government more broadly, absolutely, it's about having a collaborative research environment with this data that is available. We've got to get to a point where there's no point us working in silos. As I said at the beginning, if the data isn't being joined, isn't being linked, isn't being worked, isn't sort of being brought together, then actually there's a huge public disbenefit in that, because the insights that can be gathered to help enact better policy decision making is huge, but also it's a cost benefit thing. So if we are able to acquire data once, then link, standardize it, get it research ready, make sure the metadata is correct, etc., then there's a saving there, because other government departments aren't having to do the same work several times. Also, there's not having to repeat the same resource, so there's a time saving as much there too, resource saving. But equally, in terms of commercial data, what we're trying to do with the integrated data service is have conversations with commercial data owners and say, look, we are aware, we've done a bit of an audit on this, of government departments which are purchasing the same data multiple times at a cost of, we shan't go into, but it's not cheap, let's put it that way. And that's a significant cost if the same data set is being procured 4 times across four departments. We will have that data purchased once, we'll bring it into the IDS, and we've got to get it into a position where we can obviously, with the requirements for bringing that data in, that we can onward and forward share it for obviously projects. Now, if we're able to do that, and we appreciate that this breaks the funding model for the commercial data owners, and initially the conversations we're having are actually quite positive about this and how we compensate for the breaking of the model to a degree. As I say, conversations are ongoing, but they are positive. Then again, significant cost saving, and actually at the moment, okay, we know that the economy isn't in the best shape it's been for a while, but I tend to think and like to think of the positive. And the positive here is that it does actually present an opportunity where government departments will think carefully and they will think critically about how to work collaboratively, because in part, the current economic situation means they have to. But actually thinking more broadly, recent policy issues which have been presented because of health pandemic, etc., the economy, show that actually it's the right thing to do. So a more collaborative approach to decision making, to policy making, to data sharing, to purchasing commercial data to save money, refine resource, make things more effective, I think is where it's heading. I think it's a really exciting time, actually. My background is policy, not data, but I can see, 5 to 10 years time, IDS is really going to have shown its worth, and it's a very exciting time to sort of be part of this, and you're going to see I think a mini revolution in how data is shared, procured, and distributed in terms of the policy outputs over the next few years because of this ability to work collaboratively.
Absolutely lovely, and I agree with you there. I think collaboration is 100% the way forward, and everything I've worked on since I've been working in this area of journalism points to that. So I completely agree with you there. So that's everything for this episode of the PSE podcast. Thank you very much to James for joining me, and I guess I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you very much.